Hello and welcome to the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything fantasy and science fiction. Your host is Matt Crosswhite, and the subject matter expert is Josiah Marshall. And here we go. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Crosswhite, joined by subject matter expert Josiah Marshall. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. So I understand that today we're branching into a realm of fantasy and a little bit sci-fi that almost all of our listeners will be familiar with, but you're going to talk to us about it in kind of a unique way. The Marvel Universe and Marvel comics and movies.
Marvel
Yes?
Universe. Yes. Now, this may be a tired subject for some. It has definitely been one, I'll be honest, for me. Not to diminish it in any way. I know that this series and the long production of all of these various movies, TV shows, and whatnot has been to the liking of many people. But at the same time, I've kind of appreciated the perspective it's given me in realizing that it's a very tired subject because it's given me a position to look at it a little bit more critically, and yeah, in depth to some degree, but I'm not looking to go too in depth today. It's going to be a little bit more superficial, just some basic observations, really. But overall, I would like to just ask some basic questions of some listeners. What do you get out of Marvel? Is it simply something you can just sit down and enjoy? Or is there something personal you gain from the stories or from the characters? And why invest the time and effort and money into seeing it when there's even other things out there? What is this specific universe or this specific storyline offering you? So that would be a question I would ask of you, because I did not grow up with comic books. I didn't grow up reading comic books or even the Marvels or Avengers or anything like that. And so I came to this as an adult initially,
Sure.
and without any of the knowledge of comic books. So here's one of my first observations is this. As I understand it, the movies actually are different than the comic books. One point of that is the reason why Thanos wanted to kill off so many people. It wasn't. Now the movie says he was doing it for the sake of resources, but the comic book, he was friends with I can't remember her name. It was the goddess of death, because he was such an odd child and he had deformities, and she was the only one that would come see him as a child. And so as he got older, he wanted to get her attention more. And so he thought, well, what if I bring her half the souls of all the universe? That would get her attention. So that was the original reason. So as I said, that's just a basic observation of realizing the discrepancy between source material and art from that source material. So, and there's been so many different writers, so many different directors of all of these movies that, yeah, you're going to have varying perspectives offered and some insight given, going, hey, wait a minute, I saw this. What if we play on that a little bit more? Hey, okay, that's fine. And there's going to be a different way you tell a story visually than you do written. And so with that initial perspective in mind, that there is this big difference, then it would almost make sense that these two different but yet very similar, they still remain true to the characters and to the universe and to the overall story arc. What purpose do they serve in our life? Now, I'm not going to get so philosophical here that we can't just appreciate the fact that these are fun stories. I remember when I first saw, let's see, that would be X-Men back in the 90s and early thousands. Those were fun. Those were fun. Oh, wait. I don't think it was the 90s. Excuse me. I'm I'm living in more than one place at once in my brain at the moment. So, but when those first came out with Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier and
Hugh Jackman as Wolverine.
Hugh Jackman, yep, as Wolverine, exactly. They were fascinating, and the way they presented him was pretty basic. But you also, when you look at those movies in contrast to the movies now, there's a different way of storytelling. You get this idea in those movies that these are movies that there's certain moments that are impregnated with significance. You have those longer pauses between scenes. You also have that transition between scenes. You get various when they're coming in on the dam or the reservoir where Wolverine body was infused with that metal. You get to see everything's kind of going just a little slower. It's a steady pace, but it's just a slow pace, and every now and then it'll speed up just simply with activity, with fighting, and like that. But there's usually this slower pace to the movie, whereas now you got a much faster pace. Things are happening snappier. The dialogue's tighter. You're not being explained the story. You're being shown the story, which in a lot of ways is being much more preferred these days, but doesn't always easily translate to written story. And so in some ways I've seen how the Marvel stories are more favored that way, and as far as a movie's concerned, than a written story, which I've actually heard some people say to me, I prefer to watch and wait for watching a story through a movie than to actually sit down and read the book, because it might be presented to me in a way that's going to be not just really abridged, but just makes maybe more sense from a visual perspective. And it's like, okay, I can see where you're coming from with that argument, but at the same time, these are comic books. So why not even just go back to the comic books? But right. Everybody to their own liking. Everyone to their own liking. Right? Sure. So but one of the first movies I really wanted to touch on was the first Avengers movie, written and directed by Joss Whedon. I'm not going to get in too much deal with Joss. I'd love to spend an entire episode on Joss himself. Great writer, great director. He's produced some good stuff out there. And he has a heritage and a history. His family has a history of writing in Hollywood. I believe it was his grandfather or his father wrote episodes for Petticoat Junction and Green Acres and a lot of those older shows that we have now. And even the Andy Griffith Show, I believe, was his dad. And so he's got a family interest in writing and telling story. And the way he did it with that first one, I look at that movie. I'm not seeing, that he's trying to show, well, here's a lesson you can learn. It's not in that. I've argued before in one previous episode about the difference between telling a story and offering propaganda. Because when you're focusing on how you're going to tell a story, if you're trying to make a point with it, it can come across as propaganda. And that word is not always negative. It's not always negative. It's just simply somebody putting out something for the specific purpose of it, illustrating their perspective and point in order to convince or at least show someone else what they see. So in that comparative context, I would say that the first Avengers movie is more story than it is propaganda, for sure. And there's no real point to him, even what he's trying to show in the story, except the raw, the grittiness. I remember watching, what was it? The Incredible Hulk. And that was with Bannon. No, that's the name of the character. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, the actor. but it was more cartoony in a way. And what I liked about that was that it gave you that comic book idea until they, of course, they did Spider-Verse, and then boom, that was just phenomenal of just how they
Yeah.
blended those two mediums together. Just wowzers. But it is more grittier, and it's more it brings it down to earth, so to speak, in realizing that while these are heroes or superheroes, they're still just as, I guess the word would be, normal as everyone else. They have fears, they have concerns, they have desires. I like that. My favorite part of the entire movie. Well, it's hard. There's actually a couple, but really, I thoroughly enjoyed when who was it? Iron Man that mentioned the shawarma restaurant around the corner, and then how at the end of the movie they're all sitting there and they're not saying a word, but you can just see how exhausted they are, but yet they're there together, and a picture says 1,000 words, right? And so even just the picture of that can communicate volumes. But one of the things I liked about that type of storytelling is tension. Because there's a lack of explanation, and because you've got the visual aspect of what's going on, you don't have to have that explanation. So when Hulk takes down that flying worm, and I believe it's Thor comes up next to him and makes a comment, all Hulk does is just punch him and sends him flying. That's it. There's no dialogue. There's no reason or rhyme for it. It's just boom. And
Yes. Or when I also love with the Hulk moments in that first movie is when Loki is coming up to him, demanding him to
that's it.
submit and serve him,
Yep.
and he's like,
Yep.
don't you understand? I am a god." And then Hulk picks him up and just totally ragdolls him all over the place and throws him aside. He goes, "Puny god."
And he's laying there groaning. One of the neat little tidbits about the behind the scenes stuff, which is another one I look forward to getting into, just understanding the behind the scenes stuff when it comes to sci-fi and fantasy productions, was that they intentionally did not tell the actor, what is his name, Hiddleston, they did not tell him when they were going to pull the rope. So the stunned look on his face was done on purpose.
Oh man, that's fantastic.
So that initial scene before they cut to him being tossed back and forth, so he's being dragged out of frame. They tell him when it's so I just jerked him, and you see him go off like a rag doll.
That
There's
dude is
one
such
other
a great
movie.
actor.
Oh, he is. Tom Hiddleston is, I think, very good at it. And he brings a certain honesty to the character. He's truly able to portray this guy in a very honest way. But there was one other movie I thought did a phenomenal job in having that drag off frame screen screen where you look like the person's a rag doll, and that was Lone Star. Lone Star State of Mind with Joshua Jackson, when one of the characters gets run over backwards by a truck. And it is just watching how his body flails and the whole scream and everything is just hysterical. And there's not a whole lot that I can recall where that was just done so well. But it took Hiddleston not knowing when it was coming in order to truly get that reaction. And they did it phenomenally well. They really did.
I also saw
and
he did an
go ahead.
He did an interview explaining a different scene where Chris Hemsworth as Thor was going to hit him, and he had to sell it. But he was explaining about how Loki's helmet is so big and so heavy and stuff that he just couldn't sell it well. And he told Chris Hemsworth, "You're going to have to actually hit me." And they did it.
Yes. Yep.
And so he took a massive blow from Chris Hemsworth for the sake of the film. I love stories like that.
Well, and not only that, but well, I would say that yes, and it speaks to the camaraderie of the actors. the friendships that they have. I remember seeing them sit on some late night show host, and they're just happy with one another. They're getting
Yes.
along. They're having a ball. They all got tattoos, the same matching tattoos, except for Mark Ruffalo. He didn't get it. he wasn't going to get the tattoos, only because I don't think he has any tattoos. And so,
Okay.
but you see that even, of course, over several films, that just how well these people work together and how lighthearted things are behind the scenes. See, that's another feature that I would point out, is that the observation is that when you can work well together, and I think this is not only just Marvel, but when you can do this in any sort of production, it'll come through on camera. One of the other ones that I recall on that is Star Trek: The Next Generation. They had a ball behind the scenes, and so you could tell that through not necessarily the loss, but more the diminished tension. It didn't have to be so tense. The show didn't, and so the levity behind the scenes also came through during the actual show, and even in some specific scenes, such as when Data, they're sitting at a poker table and Riker tells him to cut the deck, and Data picks up half the deck and chucks it over his shoulder. So you go, okay, I'm seeing it there. And then you also have that contrasted with, say, DS9, where even Michael Dorn does an interview where he says that the set behind the scenes was incredibly tense. There was no laughing. There was no jocularity. There was no joking. It was kind of intense, and you could see that tension in the show. And so when we're looking at these Marvel movies, you get to see the growing development of friendship between not just the characters, but the actors in general. And they like each other. They just like each other. Now, yes, I'm going to say, yes, there is the Brie Larson bit out there, and her introduction into the group and the tension that it created. But when I look at especially that first movie, it kicked off the first Avengers movie, not X-Men or not even Iron Man, which is technically considered to have kicked off all of this for us. But that first Avengers movie, I thought, just did so well in being able to encapsulate all of the actors, but really the characters, in a way that didn't diminish one over the other, and gave them each a voice, and helped you see them for who they were and find a connection towards that character, thus making it more enjoyable. Especially when you're able to, as I've said in another podcast, get out of your own way. When you're able to just sit back and enjoy the movie, then you're just able to just act as if you're just right there with them. You're watching them, but you're more connected with the story and the characters, with the style of storytelling and directing that they're doing with these newer movies. The previous movies, such as X-Men, I still enjoy them. I really do. And I like the pacing. I'll admit, this is another observation for me. Pacing is a big deal for me. I didn't grow up watching these types of movies. My kids have even stated, having watched these movies at a younger age, that they still enjoy slower paced movies. They don't like this so quick and snappy action and dialogue going on in movies. They like to have it calm down a bit. Which is why they favor Mr. Rogers and even old black and whites and even silent movies. But what were you going to say?
But I'm going to wax philosophical for just a moment. I think
go
that
ahead.
Part of the reason, yes, you said you didn't grow up with them, but your kids enjoy the slower pace as well. I think it has a large part to do with you, and you've raised your children to be also. You guys are readers. And as you've already said, books just have to be paced differently. And I think that a lot of movies, the modern Marvel movies are a good example of it. But I think a lot of movies have sped up the pace, have sped up and exaggerated the action, And
Yeah.
like, I really enjoyed the way you described the tension, how directors are using more tension and less explanation. Um,
Hmm.
because our culture is not nearly as um, functionally literate as we used to be. Sure, a
You're
ton of
right.
people
You're
can
right.
read, but we
You're
almost might
right.
as well not be able to because we don't. And I think that
Hmm.
that has a lot to do with, um, and I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole of this, but the scrolling through social media and our attention span has diminished, and I think part of it is
Right.
helped along by, and also a response to that is the movies just clipping along quicker and quicker and quicker.
Yes. Which was actually going to be another one of my observations was that I can't
Sorry to
remember
steal your thunder.
where. Oh no, don't be. Don't be. Because I'm not the only one to have seen these. This is just observations that I've made that I'm sure other people have seen also. And I can't remember what source it was, whether I read it or heard it or watched it, but somebody was pointing out the correlation between handheld devices that we have and our constant flicking through things and the speed with which we have, such as the fact that now people don't read for 5 minutes, they might read for 30 seconds, which is why some publications, especially when it comes to news, are giving at least 3 bullet points at the beginning of an article just to be able to give pretty much the straight points of it. And then you've got the article written out. And so majority of people are just reading those bullet points and then moving on.
Right.
As a result, we see this starting to reflect. Well, the source made the suggestion that this could be a reason why it's reflecting in the way we tell stories via movies or even TV shows, is that now there's the faster clip of everything. It's going a little bit faster to keep the person engaged and to make. I've heard the argument stating that it causes them to feel more involved with the story because now they're more emotionally involved, they're more visually involved, and you're able to appreciate the tension and the drama involved without all of the slower pacing. And so when I keep bring this back to the observation that the movies are now reflecting how we've come to be conditioned by technology these days, I can see that. Now, I'm sure there's various angles that we can come in and look at it, but really, I'm just acknowledging that observation. I can see that happening, and which is partly why I have found the subject to be so tiring because it requires so much of me, and as a result, after the end of a movie, I feel so exhausted that the idea of even going, okay, I've watched the first one, there's a second one, there's a third one, now there's a TV show. I can't
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
I can't bring myself to truly try to gain all of that interweaved story just so I can have the narrative in my head. I just can't bring myself to do it because it's just so emotionally, physically, intellectually, just attentively draining.
Yeah.
Um,
And on
but
one
is
hand, it was, as far as marketing goes, it was a brilliant marketing strategy that they just pushed too hard too fast. When it
I
was
agree.
when they were dropping hints about the next Avengers movie in the standalone movies, like the next Iron Man or
Mm-hmm.
the next Thor movie, it made you want to go see those other movies of the characters you were less attached to, but you wanted to
Yeah.
see how the Avengers
Yes.
story would build. But then I
Right.
think they outpaced it and they wore out their audience. And
Mm-hmm.
argument can be made that they did that on purpose so that they could change up what they wanted to do anyway. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that they wore out the audience by adding TV shows and adding more characters to that. So you have to go see all the Marvel movies and shows in order to keep up with what's going on in the Marvel universe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which brings up another observation. The expediency which they were putting stuff out was to keep people interested and continuing to make them relevant. Um, Especially nowadays, we've got this. I've talked with this to my kids with this about this microwave effect. It's nothing new, but even back in the 90s, I remember sitting with a group and we were talking. Someone brought up it's kind of like a microwave effect, and we were like, "Whoa, that's kind of new. That's different to really think about." But nowadays, it's a matter of fact. We want things done now and more immediately, and so the the timing of how frequently they were putting stuff out, I couldn't keep up with it. And first of all, I wasn't. Now, I'll admittedly, first of all, I wasn't already into the universe, so I may not have had a big of a draw into it, so I wasn't following as much and excited or anticipated of a certain movie or a certain series coming out. But at the same time, they just pumped so much out that the idea of even trying to keep up with it was just not all that appealing to me. But that doesn't mean I can't go back and eventually enjoy it over time. And of course, they'll make their money off of that through residuals. But overall, I've appreciated it because one of the things another observation I've made is that they've done is that they've taken the reality that a lot of readers really like series. And if there's one thing that's been difficult for Hollywood to do is maintain a series of movies. TV shows are one thing, such as Star Trek. But when it comes to movies and being able to pump them out the way they've done, takes a lot of money, a lot of planning, of coordination, everything. There's a great deal of effort going into this. And I fully appreciate that by the directors, the actors, the behind the scenes staff. They have truly done an exceptional job in being what they've been, I would say would be the Lord of the Rings approach, and taking it, and the endurance that they've had to just keep going is truly exceptional. So kudos to them. I don't want to diminish anything they've done.
Sure.
High five, way to go. Way to stinking go.
Absolutely.
So for the average person who wants to enjoy these but can't, just remember the reality that, you know what, they're not going away. It's kind of funny. Nowadays, I'm reflecting back on movies that I grew up watching and have watched in the past and watched repeatedly in the past, and really and asking the question, why haven't I thought of those recently? Because it's always constantly the new thing, the next thing that culture would have us look at, and we're not often reflecting on, say, Princess Bride or Judge Dredd. You want to go even more. I don't know, maybe if little. I love it. I hate it kind of approach. There's Judge Dredd for you. That was.
I was thinking about that when you brought up that your kids enjoy more classic movies and even black and whites and stuff. I thought to myself, how many people are even showing their kids black and whites? How many other kids even have access to it? So your kids, not only are they readers, but they're also much more familiar with alternative. Yeah, they're much more educated with like the history of film and what it used to be like, and how a bunch of old movies, like a lot of the black and whites, took place in just a couple of different scenes, and then all of the dialogue. My wife and I watched this one old movie. It was called Shop on the Corner, and
Shop on the Corner, not Shop Around the Corner.
Around the Corner. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just how quickly the actors and actresses spoke, and with the vocabulary that they had, and there wasn't a change of scene every 5 seconds. And but how many kids, how many even adults these days are familiar with that pacing, such as to even consider that they might prefer that over what's currently happening?
Right. And I couldn't agree more, because in my opinion, it ends up giving an appreciation to the observer, whether they're 9 as my daughter or 11 as my son. It gives them a deeper appreciation of what is in front of them by having that experience with this medium over time. And it also helps them gain an understanding of what they enjoy, rather than just simply being so inundated with one thing. They've been able to have this broad experience with with just the medium of movies and visual in general, that they've been able to figure out this is what I like and this is what I don't like, or this is what I prefer and this is what I don't prefer. I'd even, so for example, growing up, I remember there were those background movies. I want something on, but I want something on that I don't always have to be so attentive to. Something I'm familiar with, but that I can just listen to and enjoy. There were definitely those movies. And there was a varied spectrum of that, of going, okay, I'm wanting background, but I'm wanting something along this tone or this speed. I remember doing that with Along Came a Spider, with Morgan Freeman, and I can't remember her name. But anyways, I'm sure people you and others can understand what I'm trying to say here. And so, okay, here's another one that I was thinking of just the other day, which was just random. 5 Mile Creek. I was in a pool at a buddy's HOA community, and this guy comes with his kids, and he's got an Australian accent, and so we just start chatting. And I happened to mention to him that, you know what, one of the shows I enjoyed growing up was 5 Mile Creek. And the reaction I got from him was so over the top. But come to find out, he said, I've never heard of anyone reference that show outside of Australia ever.
Oh, wow. I was going to say, I've never heard of it.
We got talking about it. It's a fun little TV show set back more towards the turn of the 20th century, of a stagecoach company that's operating along a certain 5 mile stretch. Excuse me. A stopping point at a place called 5 Mile Creek over a long stretch where they go from one town to another just on the stagecoach and just the drama around that stagecoach. And so I enjoyed it. And so it's just a fun way to be able to connect. Same as these Marvel movies do. It's not just about going to the movie theater and sitting there and just watching a movie. You're doing this with friends, which is another observation that I've made about this series, is that this has enabled the geeks to find more geeks. To enlarge their friend base, to enlarge their community, and even for others to realize, hey, I'm not the only one out there that enjoys this, and you can enjoy it with other people. And so that's what story does. It brings people together. It creates a sense of community and a sense of identity and a sense of belonging. And so those, I think, that's going to wrap up my observations on all of this. Now, there's many more conversations coming about Marvel. Sure. Don't get me wrong. I would love to be able to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy, which is arguably, now, first, I will say this. First Avengers movie is my number one favorite. That was just excellent. That's my favorite movie out of the entire compendium of Marvel movies. And I thoroughly enjoyed Iron Man, and I thoroughly enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy. I especially liked the first movies of the introduction of characters. Black Widow, Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, so on. But that first Avengers movie, man, Joss Whedon certainly set the bar on that one.
Yeah.
So I look forward to having more of those conversations down the line.
Very good. Very good. And we hope you do too, listeners. So please continue to tune in with us as we continue our Christian fantasy and sci-fi podcast, digging into different fantasy and sci-fi novels, TV shows, books, audio dramas, etc. And until next time, keep reading, keep listening, and keep enjoying.